This is Moscow. The 13 million strong metropolis is experiencing catastrophic paralysis. The Russian war machine has completely collapsed in its own home, on its own streets. Massive highways are gridlocked. 20-kilometer-long traffic jams have formed on the M4 Don Highway, a critical logistics artery leading south. Dozens of heavy-duty trucks collided with each other. Civilian and commercial logistics arteries were completely shut down within a few hours. People waited for hours, trapped inside their vehicles in the freezing cold, waiting to be rescued. After a desperate wait, dozens of Russian citizens tried to walk home. Russian authorities made headlines with an ironic recommendation in response to this situation. The crisis didn't stop at the roads. The dominoes fell one after another and spread to the airspace. Over 150 flights were delayed at critical international airports such as Sheremetyevo, Vnukovo, and Domodedovo. Radar tracking systems recorded the helpless routes of planes circling in the sky, unable to land. The terminals turned into massive refugee camps. Thousands of people trying to fly to Istanbul, Phuket, or other alternative routes were virtually held hostage in the terminals with unbelievable delays of up to 15 hours. The chaos is so great that airport management can only distribute a small cup of water to passengers every 3 hours. Food and hygiene are completely out of the question. Rosaviatsia admitted that they cannot clear the runways. This admission was proof that there were no spare parts for modern snow removal equipment. The domino effect spread beyond the capital's borders to the entire country. The city of Anadyr, located in the Chukotka region, is being flattened by hurricane-force winds. Footage leaked to open sources shows people literally flying through the streets, signs being torn down, and building facades being shattered. On the other side of the country in Sochi on the Black Sea coast, massive waves are flooding railway lines, paralyzing transportation. This situation is quite literally a failure of governance. After all, Russia experienced similar crises very recently. Transportation had completely collapsed in January as well. Airports were completely closed to flights. Trucks were paralyzed on the highways. However, the Kremlin did not learn from what happened. It chose to set aside the safety of its own people and pour all its money into a never-ending war. 66 different Russian regions made dramatic cuts of at least 10% in their housing, infrastructure, and public services budgets to offset the increased military spending. Krasnodar Krai halved its public budget. Critical regions like Volgograd had to cut their budgets by a third. Consider this fact. With the massive 11.1 trillion rubles spent on the war in 2025, Russia's decaying electrical grid, bursting pipes, and road infrastructure could have been completely rebuilt. But Moscow made a terrible trade-off. It sacrificed 145 million citizens to its warlust. The most brutal consequences of this budget transfer have now reached unavoidable proportions. Russia's underground infrastructure network, which makes life possible, had become a ticking time bomb. According to independent engineering reports, a massive portion of the country's electricity, clean water, and central heating networks, between 40% and 80%, still dated back to the Soviet era. These systems had long since reached the end of their physical lifespan and were completely worn out. The rate of wear and corrosion in underground pipelines in critical industrial cities, such as Petrozavodsk and Penza, had exceeded a critical threshold of 95%. In Murmansk, a strategic port city in the Arctic Circle, 60-year-old rotten electricity poles collapsed like paper at the slightest breeze. The failure of the system resulted not only in outages, but also in direct loss of life. In the city of Obninsk, high-pressure boiling water pipes that lost their structural integrity and suddenly exploded turned the streets into a veritable hell. Meanwhile, the Kremlin administration proudly proclaimed through its propaganda channels that the melting of glaciers due to climate change would open up the Northern Sea route to trade, making Russia a global logistics superpower. But it was watching the roads its own citizens walked on and the cities they lived in literally crumble. This systematic paralysis of the state apparatus left the civilian population completely to their own devices in times of crisis. When order and authority collapsed, the black market and opportunism kicked in with a vengeance. In Moscow, where roads were blocked and public transport collapsed, taxi and private transport fares skyrocketed 300-fold in a single day. Exorbitant prices of 1,500 rubles were demanded for a short distance of only 15 minutes. Thousands of people without money or who refused this robbery were forced to abandon their vehicles. Buried in snow on major arteries such as the Kashira Highway and walk for kilometers in freezing cold. Local chat rooms on social media platforms have become hubs where an angry public, protesting inadequate cleaning efforts, collapsing infrastructure, and the absence of the state, has organized. This widespread paralysis on the highways cannot be dismissed as merely a daily problem for civilians arriving late to work or unable to reach their homes. This situation means that Russia's entire domestic supply chain is being directly choked off. The thousands of heavy vehicles stuck on the Moscow Ring Road and federal highways connecting the capital to other regions are not ordinary vehicles. These trucks are the lifelines of logistics carrying foodstuffs, medical supplies, industrial spare parts, and basic consumer goods that need to be delivered urgently to all corners of the country. These trucks being stuck on the roads for hours, even days, has set off the first domino in a massive chain reaction. This sudden and severe disruption in the supply chain has created shockwaves that are immediately felt in the retail sector. The halt in shipments from logistics centers to stores is paving the way for shelves to empty rapidly. The anxiety emerging among consumers triggers a reflexive rush for basic food items. While the disruption in supply causes prices to skyrocket instantly, the effects of the logistical paralysis are not limited to retail or transportation costs. Industrial production facilities are also taking heavy blows from this chain reaction. The freezing of raw material shipments needed by factories on highways is causing production lines to stop and industrial output to decline. Worse still, the physical infrastructure being too worn out to bear the weight of the snow is opening the door to industrial disasters. The collapse of the massive 5,000 m² roof of the Evolut electric car factory in the Lipetsk region, which could not withstand the weight of accumulated snow, is the most concrete evidence of this. This incident is a critical case showing how infrastructural resilience has been reduced to zero, not only in civilian areas, but also in massive facilities representing the country's industrial capacity. The invisibility of state authority in this moment of crisis results in the civilian population having to fend for themselves. Truck drivers stranded on the roads face the danger of running out of fuel and are forced to keep their engines running constantly to protect themselves from the cold. This situation has the potential to cause a serious increase in fuel consumption locally and fuel shortages at regional stations. The disruption of logistics routes is not just today's problem. It is the opening of a long-term wound that will increase inflationary pressure and disrupt production supply processes for weeks to come. Every highway that closes, every cargo that cannot be delivered, is a heavy blow to Russia's domestic economy. The sum of these blows reveals how much the system's flexibility has weakened. The blocking of logistics routes also has a military dimension. The Russian army's mobility on internal routes is largely dependent on civilian rail and road infrastructure. The closure of strategic roads surrounding the capital for days disrupts not only civilian trade, but also the transfer of military personnel, spare parts, and ammunition raw materials to internal regions. While logistical problems at the front are increasing due to external attacks, this natural paralysis on the home front is causing unexpected slowdowns in the Army's supply cycle. Every delay in the system translates into an artillery battery running out of ammunition or an armored vehicle running out of fuel at the front. However, the real strategic checkmate here is who controls these massive infrastructures. And the deep panic among the elite. Sheremetyevo, Vnukovo, and Domodedovo airports are not just ordinary civilian transit hubs on the map. These massive complexes are the personal cash cows and emergency escape routes of the oligarchs in Vladimir Putin's inner circle. Control of Sheremetyevo Airport is largely in the hands of a consortium linked to Arkady Rotenberg, one of Putin's most loyal allies. On the other hand, Vnukovo is the strategic stronghold of Vitaly Vantsev and other billionaires close to the Kremlin. The operational shutdown of these facilities for hours or even days means millions of dollars in direct revenue lost per second for these oligarchs. If the state has become so impotent that it cannot even get its spoiled children's private jets off the ground, how can the security confidence of the elites who remain loyal to the regime be maintained? This logistical chokehold brutally confronts the oligarchs with a reality that no escape plan would work in the event of a major political or military collapse. Yet Russian history is replete with military victories where freezing temperatures swallowed enemy armies. In the winter of 1708 to 1709, when King Charles V of Sweden's invading army faced the Great Frost disaster with temperatures reaching -30°C, the Russians retreated, burning their own villages and supplies. The Swedish army's 35,000-strong force became bogged down in the snow, and their supply lines were cut off. While more than half of the soldiers froze to death or starved, this major logistical error accelerated the collapse of the Swedish Empire. In those days, cold was a survival strategy for Russia. In 1812, Napoleon's Grande Armée fell into a deadly trap. Retreating from Moscow, blizzards of -30° swallowed the 600,000-strong force. Russia won by surrendering its enemy to the cruelty of nature. History repeated itself in 1941 during Operation Barbarossa. Blizzards of -40 froze Hitler's 3 million strong army. Tanks stalled and supply lines were buried. Again, the Soviets used winter as their strongest ally. However, this alliance cracked in 1978. During the glacial apocalypse, temperatures hit -58 degrees. Soviet infrastructure was caught unprepared, and modern logistics were immobilized by the storm. Cities lost their electricity and heating infrastructure, and nuclear power plants faced the risk of failure due to fuel shortages. Central planning collapsed, and millions of civilians were trapped in their homes. This event was a striking proof that General Winter struck the system within. Today, there is no external invader. However, the picture of highways blocked, airports paralyzed, and logistics arteries choked is significant. This is no different from the logistical defeat experienced by Napoleon or Hitler. The Kremlin's capacity to repair this failure is in an impasse. Many analysts assume that Moscow will eventually be able to recover from this situation with its massive energy revenues. However, data from the field, economic reports, and demographic statistics are rapidly dispelling this illusion. Vladimir Putin faces three major barriers to restoring the civilian infrastructure and returning the system to its former resilience: financial exhaustion, technological isolation, and an unprecedented demographic void. The very source of funding for the repair has been drained by the state itself. Even if the Kremlin somehow allocates a budget for repairs, it faces great difficulty in procuring the critical equipment needed to get the system back on its feet. High-standard chemicals to de-ice aircraft, hydraulic spare parts for modern snowplows, or electronic control valves for high-pressure water pipes. A significant portion of these vital components were Western-made, and the existing supply chains are gone. Substitute products sourced from Asian markets or smuggled into the country through gray channels quickly fail, unable to withstand the freezing climate conditions of -30 degrees. The final and perhaps most difficult factor to manage is demographic decline. There is an urgent need for engineers to replace decaying underground pipes, heavy vehicle drivers to clear highways, and skilled technicians to repair power lines. However, the state mobilized a significant portion of this skilled workforce to the front lines in waves of conscription, or hundreds of thousands of anti-war experts were forced to leave the country. Vladimir Putin faces a chest-like stalemate within this triple bind. The historically protective freezing climate has now become an internal threat, exposing the Kremlin's administrative failure. What is happening on the streets of Moscow is less a testament to the power of nature than a declaration of bankruptcy for a system that has exhausted its resources and allowed its infrastructure to decay. Canceled flights, blocked highways, and crowds waiting in the dark prove how the regime's fundamental promise of stability has vanished. The price of war is being paid not only by losses on the front lines, but also by civilians freezing in the heart of the capital and stranded on the roads. There is no longer any illusion of safety for Moscow. The system is crumbling from within. So what are your thoughts on this matter? We would love to hear your opinions in the comments. To stay updated on new videos and in-depth analyses, please subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. Stay with PPR Global in pursuit of the truth. Thank you for choosing us.